The blizzard hit Denver like a white wall of fury, transforming the busy airport into a stranded city of frustrated travelers. Snow pelted the massive windows of Terminal B as Harrison Kane stood at Gate 47, his steel-gray eyes reflecting the storm outside. At 34, he commanded attention without trying. 6'2" with dark brown hair styled perfectly despite the travel chaos, wearing a charcoal wool coat over a midnight blue cashmere sweater that hugged his athletic frame. His jawline was sharp enough to cut glass, and his hands, adorned with a platinum Patek Philippe watch, gripped his phone with the controlled tension of a man accustomed to bending the world to his will. All flights to Los Angeles have been canceled due to severe weather conditions. We apologize for the inconvenience. Harrison's internal monologue was a familiar symphony of calculation and control. 3 deals pending in LA tomorrow. Martinez expects his payment by midnight. The Colombian shipment arrives Tuesday. He wasn't just any tech entrepreneur. He was the invisible king of a multi-million-dollar drug trafficking empire, his legitimate software company serving as the perfect front for money laundering operations that span from Denver to Miami. The storm wasn't just inconvenient. It was potentially catastrophic for his carefully orchestrated criminal schedule. "This is ridiculous," muttered a businessman nearby, but Harrison remained silent. He'd learned long ago that patience was a predator's greatest weapon. His phone buzzed, a text from his Lieutenant Rodriguez. "Boss, Miami connection is getting nervous about the delay." Harrison's fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. "Handle it." Storm changes nothing. 20 gates away, Special Agent Camila Torres stood in line at the customer service desk, her heart racing with the thrill of the hunt. At 29, she was a vision of understated beauty, 5'6" with rich mahogany skin that seemed to glow under the harsh airport lighting, her natural hair pulled back in an elegant low bun that showcased her graceful neck. She wore a cream-colored wool coat over dark jeans and burgundy ankle boots, her style effortlessly chic yet approachable. Her dark brown eyes held an intensity that could pierce through lies, though right now they sparkled with the satisfaction of a predator closing in on her prey. 6 months of surveillance. 6 months of building this case. Camila's mind raced through the evidence she'd meticulously gathered on Harrison Kane. Bank transfers to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Encrypted communications with known drug distributors. Security footage of him meeting with cartel representatives in seemingly innocent coffee shops across 3 states. Her cover identity as Camila Rodriguez, freelance marketing consultant, had allowed her to move in his social circles without suspicion. Tomorrow's planned arrest in Los Angeles would culminate the biggest case of her career. "Ma'am, all hotels near the airport are fully booked," the exhausted airline representative explained to the woman ahead of her. "We're setting up cots in Terminal C for stranded passengers." Camila's pulse quickened. This wasn't part of the plan. She needed to maintain visual contact with Kane, but sleeping on airport cots would make surveillance nearly impossible. Her phone vibrated, a message from her partner Agent Williams. "Target is stuck too. Maintain cover. Don't lose him." As the line moved forward, Camila caught sight of a familiar silhouette across the terminal. Even from this distance, Harrison Kane's presence was magnetic. She'd studied him for months through telephoto lenses and surveillance footage, but seeing him in person always sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Focus, Torres. He's a criminal. A very dangerous, very handsome criminal." The announcement echoed through the terminal again. Due to the unprecedented storm, Denver International Airport will be providing emergency accommodations. Please proceed to designated areas for assignment. Harrison pocketed his phone and moved with the fluid grace of a man who owned every room he entered. His criminal empire had taught him to read people instantly, to identify threats and opportunities in the span of a heartbeat. As he walked toward the accommodation desk, his trained eyes swept the crowd, cataloging faces, noting tensions, searching for anything that seemed out of place. Meanwhile, Camila adjusted her strategy. The storm had created an opportunity she hadn't anticipated. Being stranded together could provide unprecedented access to her target. She needed to engineer a coincidental meeting that would seem natural. Her training at Quantico had covered dozens of scenarios, but falling snow wasn't typically part of undercover operations. What do you think happens when these two masters of deception find themselves trapped together by forces beyond their control? Drop a comment below and let me know your predictions. The accommodation line moved slowly, like a river of frustrated humanity. Harrison found himself third in line behind a crying mother with twin toddlers and an elderly man muttering about missing his grandson's birthday. The scene was almost amusing to someone who'd built an empire on reading human weakness and desperation. Next, called the overwhelmed hotel coordinator, a middle-aged woman whose patience was clearly wearing thin. I need to inform everyone that we're down to our last few rooms. Most people will need to share accommodations. Harrison stepped forward when his turn came, his command presence immediately shifting the coordinator's demeanor from harried to professionally attentive. "Harrison Kane," he said smoothly, sliding his black American Express across the counter. "I need a room. Premium suite if available." "I'm sorry, Mr. Kane, but we only have standard rooms left, and I'm afraid you'll need to share. The storm has created unprecedented demand." For a man who controlled drug trafficking routes across 4 states, sharing a hotel room with a stranger was merely another variable to manage. "That's acceptable," he replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to having his decisions respected without question. Behind him, Camila's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the perfect opportunity. As Harrison completed his paperwork, she stepped closer, close enough to catch the subtle scent of his cologne, something expensive and understated that probably cost more than her monthly salary. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of polite desperation. "I couldn't help but overhear. If you're looking for someone to share the room cost, I'm a very quiet, very clean travel companion." Harrison turned, and for the first time in months, Camila saw him up close without the barrier of surveillance equipment. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and when they met hers, something electric passed between them that had nothing to do with her investigation, and everything to do with pure, undeniable attraction. 6 months of watching him from afar hadn't prepared her for this moment. "Harrison Kane," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and sent an unexpected shiver up her arm. "Camila Rodriguez," she replied, using her cover identity while drowning in eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed facade. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, her name rolling off his tongue like silk, "I think this storm just became a lot more interesting." As they walked toward the shuttle that would take them to the emergency hotel accommodations, neither realized they were both thinking the same thought: this changes everything. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing Denver in pristine white, as if the universe itself was demanding these two souls collide in ways that would transform both their lives forever. The hotel shuttle lurched through the snow-covered streets of Denver, its headlights cutting through the swirling white darkness. Harrison sat beside Camila, hyper-aware of the way her shoulder occasionally brushed his as the vehicle navigated the icy roads. For a man who controlled every aspect of his criminal empire with calculated precision, this unexpected proximity to a beautiful stranger felt dangerously unscripted. "So what brings you to Denver?" Camila asked, her voice steady despite the way her pulse raced every time she caught him looking at her. She'd rehearsed casual conversation starters for months, but sitting this close to him, breathing the same air, made every word feel loaded with significance. "Business," Harrison replied, which was technically true. His meeting with the Mexican suppliers had been postponed due to the storm, but he wasn't about to elaborate on the specifics of moving 50 kilos of cocaine through Colorado. "Software development." Rather boring, actually. What about you? Lie smoothly, Torres. Marketing consultation. I help small businesses develop their brand presence. The cover story rolled off her tongue effortlessly, even as she noted the way his hands rested on his knees, strong, capable hands that she knew from her surveillance had signed orders worth millions in illegal drugs. The shuttle pulled up to the Hampton Inn, a modest building that glowed warmly against the storm. As they hurried through the falling snow, Harrison instinctively placed his hand on the small of Camila's back, guiding her toward the entrance. The gesture was protective, gentlemanly, and sent heat radiating through her entire body despite the frigid air. Focus on the mission, she reminded herself, even as her body betrayed her with its response to his touch. Room 237 was standard business accommodation, 2 queen beds separated by a nightstand, a small desk by the window, and a bathroom that would require careful coordination. The moment they stepped inside, the intimate reality of their situation hit them both. I can take the floor, Harrison offered immediately, dropping his leather overnight bag near the door. I've slept in worse places. You have no idea, Camila thought, remembering the surveillance photos of him leaving a warehouse in Miami at 3 a.m., likely after overseeing a drug shipment. But his offer was genuine, and something in his voice suggested he actually meant it. Don't be ridiculous, she replied, hanging her coat in the small closet. We're both adults. 2 beds, no problem. The blizzard intensified outside their window, creating a cocoon of intimacy as they settled into the unexpected arrangement. Harrison ordered room service, wine, cheese, fruit, and sandwiches, with the casual generosity of someone accustomed to the finer things in life, though Camila knew his wealth came from sources far darker than software sales. To unexpected delays, Harrison said, raising his wine glass as they sat across from each other at the small table. The burgundy liquid caught the lamplight like liquid rubies, and when he smiled, Camila felt something crack open in her chest that had nothing to do with her professional objectives. To making the best of bad situations, she replied, clinking her glass against his. The wine was excellent, probably worth more than most people spent on groceries in a month. As the evening deepened, their conversation flowed with surprising ease. Harrison found himself sharing stories from his legitimate business ventures, carefully edited versions of his life that painted him as just another successful entrepreneur. But beneath his polished exterior, Camila glimpsed moments of genuine vulnerability that didn't appear in any FBI psychological profile. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Harrison asked suddenly, staring out at the snow. Like you wake up one day and realize you've become someone you never intended to be? The question hit Camila like a physical blow. Here she was, sitting across from a man she'd been trained to see as a criminal, listening to him express doubts that sounded remarkably like her own internal struggles about maintaining her cover identity. Every day, she whispered, the honesty slipping out before she could stop it. Sometimes I look in the mirror and wonder who I really am underneath all the expectations. Their eyes met across the small table, and in that moment, the careful walls they both built around their hearts began to crumble. Harrison reached across the space between them, his fingers tracing the back of her hand with a gentleness that contradicted everything she thought she knew about him. You're beautiful, he said simply, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't identify. Not just physically. There's something about you that feels real, honest. If only you knew, Camila thought, even as she turned her hand over to intertwine their fingers. His touch was electric, sending sparks racing up her arm and straight to her heart. She was falling for her target, and every rational part of her mind screamed warnings that she couldn't seem to hear over the thundering of her pulse. Harrison, she began, not knowing how to finish the sentence. How could she tell him that everything about this moment was built on deception? That she knew the password to his encrypted phone, the location of his drug storage facilities, the names of his criminal associates? "I know this is crazy," he continued, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "We just met a few hours ago. But sitting here with you feels more real than anything in my life has felt in years." The irony was devastating. Here was a man who built his empire on lies and violence, talking about truth and authenticity while holding the hand of a federal agent trained to destroy him. And yet, the emotion in his voice, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and rare, it felt genuine in a way that made her chest ache. "What if I told you I wasn't who you think I am?" Camila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harrison's eyes searched her face, and for a terrifying moment, she thought he might see through her cover. Instead, he smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face from intimidating to heartbreakingly handsome. "Then I'd say that makes two of us," he replied. "Maybe we can figure out who we really are together." The words hung in the air between them like a promise and a threat. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside their temporary sanctuary, two people who lived their lives in shadows found themselves reaching towards something that felt like light. What happens when a master criminal and the agent hunting him start falling for each other? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think love can really change someone, or is Camila walking into a trap? As the night deepened, they moved to sit on the edge of one bed, the wine making them both more honest than was probably wise. Harrison found himself talking about his sister, the only family he had left, though he carefully omitted the part about how his criminal activities were partly motivated by ensuring she could attend medical school without student debt. "She's studying to be a pediatric surgeon," he said, his voice softening in a way Camila had never heard in any of their recorded conversations. "Brilliant, kind, everything I should have been." "Should have been?" Camila asked, genuinely curious despite herself. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, staring at their joined hands. "Let's just say I took some wrong turns along the way. Made choices that seemed necessary at the time." Like building a drug empire, Camila thought, but something in his tone made her wonder if there was more to his story than the black and white narrative in his FBI file. The Harrison Kane she'd been tracking for months was supposed to be cold, calculating, ruthless. The man sitting beside her seemed haunted by regrets that felt remarkably human. "We all make choices we're not proud of," she said carefully. "What matters is what we do going forward." He turned to look at her then, his storm-gray eyes intense with an emotion that made her breath catch. "What if some choices can't be undone? What if you've gone so far down a dark path that there's no way back to the light?" The question was loaded with pain, and Camila felt her heart breaking for this complicated man who was supposed to be her target, not her. What was he becoming to her? "I believe everyone deserves a chance at redemption," she said, meaning every word despite the impossible situation they were in. "Sometimes all it takes is one person believing you're worth saving." Harrison's hand cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with reverent tenderness. "You're remarkable, Camila Rodriguez. I don't know what I did to deserve meeting you tonight." "You don't deserve it," she should have thought. "You're a criminal who's hurt countless people with your drugs." But looking into his eyes, all she could think was how much she wanted to be the person who believed he was worth saving. When he leaned in to kiss her, she didn't pull away. His lips were soft, tentative at first, then more confident as she responded. The kiss tasted like wine and promises, like hope and heartbreak all tangled together. It was the worst possible thing she could do for her career, and the most right thing she'd felt in years. They broke apart, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air in the dim hotel room while the storm continued to rage outside, nature itself seeming to mirror the chaos beginning to unfold in both their carefully controlled lives. "This is probably a terrible idea," Harrison murmured against her lips. "Probably," Camila agreed, even as she pulled him closer. Neither of them slept much that night, though they stayed on their respective beds, the space between them charged with possibility and the weight of secrets that could destroy them both. Dawn broke gray and reluctant over Denver, the storm finally exhausted but leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Camila woke first, her internal clock trained by years of federal service, and for a blissful moment she simply watched Harrison sleep. In the pale morning light filtering through the hotel curtains, he looked younger, almost innocent, his dark hair tousled, his sharp features softened by sleep. The sight made her chest tight with emotions she had no business feeling. What have I done? The reality of the previous night crashed over her like ice water. She'd kissed her target. More than that, she'd started falling for him. Every rule of undercover work, every principle of professional conduct, lay in ruins around her heart. Her phone buzzed with a text from Agent Williams. Check in. Needs status update on target. Harrison stirred, those storm-gray eyes opening to find her watching him. The smile that spread across his face was devastating in its genuine warmth. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep and something deeper. "Tell me last night wasn't a dream." Camila's heart hammered as she forced herself to create distance, both physical and emotional. "We should talk about what happened," she said, sitting up and pulling her knees to her chest, a defensive posture that didn't go unnoticed by a man trained to read people's weaknesses. Harrison sat up slowly, immediately alert to the shift in her tone. In his world, people changed their attitudes overnight for only a few reasons: fear, manipulation, or betrayal. His criminal instincts, dulled by wine and unexpected emotion the night before, began to sharpen. "Regrets already?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I thought we had something real." "That's just it," Camila said, hating herself for the words she had to say. "We don't know each other." "Not really. Last night was intense, but we got caught up in the situation. The storm being stranded, it created a false intimacy." Lie to him, her training demanded. Protect your cover. But every word felt like swallowing glass. Harrison studied her face with the intensity of a predator recognizing a threat. "False intimacy," he repeated slowly. "Is that what you call it when someone tells you they believe everyone deserves redemption?" The way he threw her own words back at her made Camila flinch. She could see him building walls in real time, his expression shifting from vulnerable to guarded to something harder, the face of a man who controlled millions in illegal enterprises and didn't tolerate deception. "I think," she said carefully, "that we should just forget last night happened and go our separate ways when the airport reopens." Wrong move, Torres. She could see it immediately, the way his jaw tightened, how his hands stilled. Harrison Kane hadn't built a drug empire by accepting rejection gracefully or walking away from complicated situations. "Interesting," he said, standing and moving to the window. The snow outside was pristine, unmarked, like a blank canvas waiting for violence. "You know what I've learned in business, Camila? When someone tries to minimize something that was clearly significant, they're usually hiding something." His tone had shifted entirely. Gone was the vulnerable man who'd talked about redemption, replaced by someone calculating and dangerous. Camila felt the hair on her arms rise as she recognized the voice from the wiretapped conversations, the cold authority that had ordered drug shipments and eliminated competition. "You're overthinking this," she said, forcing lightness into her voice while her hand instinctively moved toward her purse, where her service weapon was concealed. "Sometimes attraction is just attraction. Chemistry in a weird situation." Harrison turned from the window, and his smile was sharp enough to cut. "Chemistry. Right." He moved to his overnight bag, and Camila tensed until she realized he was just pulling out his phone. "The airport's reopening this afternoon. Flights should resume by evening." "That's good news," Camila said, relief flooding through her even as something that felt suspiciously like disappointment twisted in her stomach. "Very good," Harrison agreed, but his eyes never left her face. I have some important business meetings in Los Angeles that can't be delayed any longer. The drug shipment. Camila's mind immediately jumped to the intelligence briefing she'd memorized. Harrison was supposed to oversee the distribution of 50 kilograms of pure Colombian cocaine through his West Coast network. The storm had delayed one of the biggest trafficking operations her task force had ever tracked. "Well," she said, standing and beginning to gather her things, "I guess this is where we say goodbye." "Is it?" Harrison asked quietly. There was something in his voice, hurt, maybe, or suspicion. "You seem awfully eager to get away from me, considering how you responded when I kissed you last night." The comment hit its mark, and Camila felt heat flood her cheeks. She had responded, eagerly, desperately, like a woman starved for genuine connection. Which was exactly what she was, she realized with uncomfortable clarity. "Harrison," she began, but he held up a hand. "Don't." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I understand. Rich guy, questionable past, complicated life, not exactly boyfriend material for a nice marketing consultant from, where did you say you were from again?" The question was casual, but Camila caught the trap immediately. She'd never mentioned her hometown in her cover story, and a man like Harrison would remember every detail of their conversation. "Denver, actually," she lied smoothly. "Born and raised." Harrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Funny. Your accent says East Coast. Boston, maybe? Or perhaps somewhere with better federal law enforcement training." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Camila's blood turned to ice as she realized Harrison's suspicions had crystallized into something far more dangerous than hurt feelings. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but her hand was already moving toward her weapon. "Easy," Harrison said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to controlling dangerous situations. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just curious. See, I've built my success on reading people, and you, beautiful Camila, are not who you claim to be." Abort mission. The thought screamed through her mind. Get out. Call for backup. Protect your cover. But instead, she found herself frozen, staring into the eyes of a man who was simultaneously her target and someone she was falling for, a combination that could destroy her career and possibly get her killed. "You're paranoid," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Success can do that to people. Make them see threats where there aren't any." Harrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, there are threats, Camila. The question is whether you're one of them." The tension in the room was suffocating. Two predators circling each other, each trying to determine how much the other knew, how much danger they were in. Outside, Denver was waking up to a snow-covered morning, normal people going about their normal lives, completely unaware that in room 237 of the Hampton Inn, two people trained to kill were dancing around secrets that could destroy them both. Do you think Harrison has figured out who Camila really is? Drop your theories in the comments. Is this the end of their connection, or just the beginning of something even more dangerous? "I think," Harrison said finally, his voice soft but carrying an undertone that made Camila's skin crawl, "we should have breakfast together. One last meal before we part ways forever." It wasn't a request. In his world, when Harrison Kane suggested something, smart people agreed. The alternative was often fatal. "That sounds lovely," Camila replied, her training kicking in even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She was in deep now, deeper than any undercover operation had ever taken her. The man she'd started falling for was suspicious enough to be dangerous, and she was trapped in a hotel room with someone who had killed people for less than suspecting his true identity. As they prepared to go downstairs to the hotel restaurant, both of them playing their roles while calculating their next moves, neither realized that the storm outside had been nothing compared to the tempest about to be unleashed in both their lives. The careful game of deception they'd been playing was about to become something far more deadly, and the stakes were no longer just professional. They were personal, and in Harrison's world, personal stakes were the kind that got people buried in shallow graves. But as dangerous as Harrison Kane could be when threatened, he was about to discover that underestimating a federal agent trained to infiltrate his world was a mistake that could cost him everything he built, including his freedom, his empire, and possibly his life. The breakfast invitation wasn't just a meal. It was the opening move in a deadly chess game where both players were hiding their pieces, and only one could survive with their secrets intact. The hotel restaurant buzzed with the subdued energy of stranded travelers, their conversations mixing complaints about delayed flights with relief at finding decent coffee. Harrison chose a corner table with clear sightlines to all entrances, a habit ingrained by years of conducting business where betrayal meant death. He'd changed into a charcoal gray Henley that emphasized his broad shoulders and dark jeans that fit like they'd been tailored specifically for him. Even in casual clothes, he radiated the controlled power of a man accustomed to life-or-death decisions. Camila slid into the seat across from him, hyper-aware of every exit, every potential weapon, every person who might be backup she hadn't spotted. She'd chosen an emerald green sweater that brought out the golden undertones in her skin and black leggings that would allow for quick movement if needed. Her service weapon was secure in her purse, but in a crowded restaurant, drawing it would create more problems than it solved. "You look tense," Harrison observed, his voice carrying false concern as he sipped his black coffee. "Trouble sleeping?" "He knows something." The certainty settled in her stomach like lead. "Just processing everything that's happened," she replied carefully. "It's been an unexpected 24 hours. Unexpected." Harrison set down his cup with deliberate precision. "Yes, I imagine it has been. Tell me, Camila, in your marketing work, do you often find yourself in situations that require quick thinking under pressure?" The question was a landmine wrapped in casual conversation. Camila recognized the interrogation technique, established rapport, then probe for inconsistencies. She'd used it herself countless times. "Occasionally," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Clients can be demanding. Crisis management is part of the job." "Crisis management," he repeated, and something predatory flickered in his storm-gray eyes. "That's a useful skill set. I imagine you're quite good at adapting your approach, depending on the situation." Before Camila could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID made her blood freeze. Agent Williams, DEA. In her cover identity, she had no reason to know anyone at the Drug Enforcement Administration. "Excuse me," she said, declining the call quickly. "Spam call." But Harrison had seen the screen. For just a moment, his mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating that made her understand exactly why witnesses in his organization tended to disappear. "Popular lady," he said quietly. "Spam calls from federal agents. How modern." The words hung between them like a loaded gun. Camila felt her cover disintegrating in real time, but her training kicked in, when compromised, create chaos and extract. "I think you're mistaken," she said, reaching for her purse. "I should probably sit." The single word carried such quiet authority that Camila found herself obeying before conscious thought could intervene. Harrison's hand was resting casually on the table, but she could see the tension in his fingers, the way he positioned himself to move fast if necessary. "You're going to finish your coffee," he continued conversationally, "and we're going to have a very honest conversation about who you really are and why you're so interested in my business affairs." He definitely knows. Panic clawed at her throat, but years of training kept her voice level. "Harrison, I think you're reading too much into." 3 months ago, he interrupted, his voice so soft other diners couldn't overhear, someone started asking questions about my company's shipping manifests. Very specific questions. Very federal questions. Camila's mouth went dry. The shipping manifests had been her breakthrough, the documents that revealed how Harrison used his legitimate tech company to transport drugs inside shipments of computer equipment. 6 weeks ago, Harrison continued, a beautiful woman started showing up at events in my social circle. Different events, different venues, but always there. Always watching. He'd made her surveillance. Professional humiliation burned through her chest even as fear for her safety intensified. She'd been careful, professional, invisible, or so she'd thought. And last night, Harrison's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. That same woman just happened to need a room share with a stranger who turned out to be me. What are the odds? The restaurant suddenly felt suffocating. Other diners chatted and laughed around them, oblivious to the deadly game playing out at table 12. Camila's hand inched toward her purse again, but Harrison's next words stopped her cold. I wouldn't recommend going for your weapon, Agent Torres. Because yes, I know your real name too. Her cover wasn't just blown, it was obliterated. But something in his tone made her pause. If Harrison Kane wanted her dead, she probably would be already. His reputation for eliminating threats was well documented in DEA files. What do you want? She asked quietly. Honesty, he replied. For the first time since we met, I want the truth. Starting with how long you've been building a case against me. Like hell. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something that made her hesitate. Hurt. Beneath the criminal calculating, beneath the predator's assessment of threat levels, Harrison Kane looked genuinely wounded by her deception. 6 months, she heard herself say, then immediately cursed her traitorous tongue. 6 months. He nodded slowly. And last night? Was that part of your investigation too? The question hit like a physical blow. Because the honest answer was complicated, messy, unprofessional, and potentially career-ending. No, she whispered. Last night was. Was what, Camila? His use of her real name was deliberate, intimate, dangerous. A mistake, she said, hating the words even as she spoke them. Harrison's laugh was bitter. A mistake. Right. He signaled the waitress for more coffee, the gesture casual despite the tension crackling between them. You know what's funny? For about 12 hours, I actually believed someone could see past the surface. Could look at a man like me and think he might be worth saving. The pain in his voice was real raw, and it cut through her professional detachment like a knife. This was the man who'd talked about redemption in the darkness, who'd kissed her like she was precious beyond measure. Harrison. Don't. He held up a hand. We both know what this is now. The question is what we do about it. Camila's mind raced through possibilities. She could call for backup, but Harrison hadn't technically threatened her. She could try to arrest him, but she had no warrant and no immediate evidence of criminal activity. She could run, but something told her Harrison wouldn't let her simply walk away with 6 months of intelligence about his operations. What are you suggesting? She asked. Harrison leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You want to bring me down, Agent Torres? Then you're going to have to work for it. What does that mean? It means, his smile was predatory and challenging, that you've just become part of my organization. Congratulations, you're now my new head of security consulting. The audacity of it stole her breath. You're insane. I'm practical, he corrected. You know too much about my operations to simply walk away. I know too much about your investigation to let you return to your handlers with actionable intelligence. So we're stuck with each other. He's right. The realization was terrifying. She couldn't arrest him without evidence, couldn't extract without compromising months of investigation, and couldn't trust him not to disappear if she let him out of her sight. "You're proposing what exactly?" "That I work for you." "I'm proposing," Harrison said, his eyes never leaving hers, "that we find out if what happened last night was real or just excellent undercover work. Because either way, Agent Torres, you and I are going to be spending a lot more time together. What do you think? Is Harrison crazy like a fox, or just crazy? Can these two enemies forced together find a way to coexist, or is this a recipe for disaster? Let me know your thoughts in the comments." The breakfast around them continued as if the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. But Camila could feel the ground moving beneath her feet as she realized Harrison Kane, criminal, drug trafficker, and the man she'd started falling for, had just made her an offer she might not be able to refuse. "You're talking about kidnapping a federal agent," she said carefully. "I'm talking about a consulting arrangement," Harrison corrected smoothly. "Very well-paid consulting. Think of it as extended undercover work. My supervisors will notice if I disappear." "Will they?" Harrison's smile was knife-sharp. "According to your cover story, you're a freelance consultant. No office, no fixed schedule, no one expecting you anywhere specific. Very convenient for someone conducting surveillance." He'd done his homework, probably while she was sleeping. The thought sent ice through her veins even as she grudgingly admired his thoroughness. "Besides," he continued, "you're not disappearing. You're simply changing employers. Temporarily." "And if I refuse?" Harrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them, a subtle reminder of exactly how dangerous he could be when crossed. "I don't think you will," he said quietly. "Because you want to bring me down more than you want to protect yourself. And the only way to do that now is from the inside." He's right again. The bastard was reading her like an open book, using her own dedication against her. But there was something else in his proposal, something that made her pulse quicken with more than fear. "How do I know you won't kill me the moment you don't need me anymore?" "You don't," Harrison admitted with brutal honesty. "But consider this, if I wanted you dead, would we be having breakfast?" The logic was sound, even if it wasn't particularly comforting. Camila found herself caught between professional duty and something far more dangerous: curiosity about the man who could plan drug operations with ruthless efficiency and kiss her with devastating tenderness in the same 24 hours. "What exactly would this consulting arrangement involve?" she asked, surprised to hear the words coming out of her mouth. "You tell me what you know about my operations," Harrison said simply. "I tell you what you got wrong. We figure out where the leaks are in my organization, who's been feeding information to law enforcement, and how to plug those holes. You want me to help you avoid prosecution. I want you to help me understand how badly compromised I am," he corrected. "What happens after that? Well, we'll see." There was something in his tone, not quite hope, but not complete cynicism either. As if part of him was still the man who'd talked about redemption in the darkness. "And if I help you, what guarantee do I have that you won't simply eliminate the witnesses and disappear?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "None," he said finally. "But I give you my word that as long as you're honest with me, you'll be safe." The word of a drug trafficker. "The word of a man who's never broken a promise to someone he cares about," Harrison replied quietly. The admission hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to address. But it was there, the acknowledgement that last night had meant something to him too, that whatever was growing between them had the power to complicate everything. "This is insane," Camila said finally. "Completely," Harrison agreed. "But it's also the only option that keeps us both alive and gives you a chance to finish what you started." As she looked into his eyes, storm gray and completely serious, Camila realized she was about to make either the smartest or stupidest decision of her career. But with her cover blown and 6 months of investigation hanging in the balance, she really only had one choice. "All right," she said quietly. "But I have conditions." Harrison's smile was equal parts relief and predatory satisfaction. "I wouldn't expect anything less from a federal agent. Let's hear them." And as they began negotiating the terms of the most dangerous undercover operation of her career, Camila couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a line she might never be able to uncross, professionally, personally, and morally. But she was also closer to bringing down Harrison Kane than any law enforcement officer had ever been. The question was whether she could maintain her objectivity long enough to complete the mission, or if the man across from her would prove that sometimes the line between duty and desire was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. The breakfast dishes sat forgotten between them as two predators began planning a partnership that could either destroy them both or give them everything they'd never known they wanted. The elevator climbed 37 floors in silence, each number lighting up like a countdown to revelation. Harrison's downtown office occupied the entire top floor of the Millennium Tower, a glass monument to legitimate success that perfectly concealed the criminal empire beneath. Camila stood beside him, hyper-aware of every detail, the way his charcoal suit fit his frame like armor, the subtle tension in his jaw, the controlled breathing of a man about to expose his most dangerous secrets. "Welcome to Kane Technologies," Harrison said as the elevator doors opened, revealing a space that belonged in Architectural Digest. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains, while modern art pieces worth more than most people's houses decorated walls of polished concrete and steel. But Camila's trained eye caught the details that mattered: reinforced glass, discreet security cameras, and the barely visible outline of a panic room behind the bookshelf. "Impressive," she said, meaning it. "How much of it is legitimate?" "About 60%, Harrison replied with disarming honesty. "The software development, cloud storage solutions, and cybersecurity consulting are all completely legal. Very profitable, too." He moved to his desk, a massive piece of reclaimed wood that had probably cost more than her annual salary, and pressed a hidden switch. A section of the wall slid back, revealing a secondary office that was all business and no decoration. "And the other 40%? Camila asked, though she already knew the answer. "The other 40%, Harrison said, gesturing for her to follow him into the hidden room, "is what you've been investigating for 6 months. The concealed office was a study in controlled chaos. Multiple monitors displayed shipping routes, financial transactions, and encrypted communications. Maps covered one wall, marked with pins and colored strings that traced drug distribution networks across 4 states. It was exactly what Camila had expected to find, and yet seeing it laid out so meticulously was still breathtaking in its scope. "Jesus," she breathed, understanding for the first time the true scale of Harrison's operation. "You're not just trafficking drugs. You're running the entire supply chain." "From production to street distribution," Harrison confirmed, settling into a leather chair that had clearly seen countless late-night strategy sessions. "Cocaine from Colombia, heroin from Afghanistan, synthetic drugs from 3 different labs in Mexico. I don't touch the product myself, but I control every aspect of getting it where it needs to go." Camila sank into the chair across from him, her mind racing to process the implications. "The DEA estimates your organization moves about 50 million in product annually. We were wrong, weren't we?" "By about a factor of 4, Harrison said with something that might have been pride. 200 million last year. On track for 250 this year, assuming my current legal troubles don't interfere." The numbers were staggering. Camila had thought she was investigating a mid-level trafficking operation. Instead, she'd stumbled onto one of the largest drug empires in the western United States. "Why?" she asked, genuinely curious. You clearly have a head for business. This company alone probably generates 8 figures annually. Why risk everything for illegal money? Harrison was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains as if they held answers to questions he'd never asked himself. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested this was the first time he'd ever told the complete truth. "My father was a cop," he said simply. The revelation hit Camila like a physical blow. Of all the possible explanations she'd considered, this wasn't one of them. "Detective Lieutenant Thomas Kane, Denver PD," Harrison continued, his voice flat and factual. 26 years on the force. Died when I was 19. "I'm sorry," Camila said automatically, then caught herself. "Wait. Died how?" Harrison's smile was bitter as winter wind. "Officially? Heart attack. Stress of the job," they said. "Poor diet, too much coffee, the usual cop lifestyle casualties." "And unofficially?" "Unofficially, my father was getting too close to a drug operation run by a man named Eduardo Vasquez. Vasquez owned half the judges in Denver and most of the senior police administration. When my father wouldn't take the hint to back off, Vasquez arranged for him to have a very convenient heart attack." The pieces began clicking into place in Camila's mind. "You know this for certain?" "I know it because Vasquez told me," Harrison said, his voice carrying a chill that made her shiver. "At my father's funeral. Came right up to me at the graveside, offered his condolences, and mentioned how dangerous police work could be for those who didn't understand the importance of cooperation." "Sweet Jesus. How old were you?" 19. College sophomore, computer science major, completely convinced the world was fundamentally fair and justice always prevailed. Harrison's laugh held no humor. "Vasquez cured me of that delusion very quickly." Camila found herself leaning forward, drawn into a story that was recontextualizing everything she thought she knew about the man across from her. "What did you do?" "What could I do? I was a college kid with no money, no connections, and no evidence that would stand up in court. So I did what any rational person would do. I got smart, got strong, and got patient." "You planned revenge." "I planned justice," Harrison corrected. "The legal system had failed my father completely. Every institution that was supposed to protect him had either betrayed him or looked the other way. So I decided to beat them at their own game." The hidden office suddenly felt smaller, more intimate, as if Harrison's confession had drawn invisible walls around them. Camila realized she was holding her breath. "It took me 8 years," Harrison continued. 8 years to build a legitimate business, establish credibility, and create a network of contacts in the criminal underworld. 8 years to position myself close enough to Vasquez to destroy him completely." "And did you? Destroy him?" Harrison's smile was sharp as a blade. "Eduardo Vasquez died 3 years ago in federal prison, serving a life sentence for drug trafficking, money laundering, and the murder of 2 police officers. He lost everything: his empire, his family's respect, his freedom, and finally his life when one of his former partners decided he knew too much." The satisfaction in Harrison's voice was unmistakable, but there was something else there too, a hollowness that suggested victory hadn't brought the peace he'd expected. "But you didn't stop there," Camila observed. "You kept the criminal operation running. By the time I brought down Vasquez, I controlled a significant portion of his distribution network. Dismantling it would have created a power vacuum that someone much worse would have filled. At least I knew I could run it. Cleanly." "Cleanly." Camila couldn't keep the disbelief out of her voice. "You're selling drugs that destroy families, Harrison. There's nothing clean about that." "No violence," Harrison said defensively. "No sales to minors. No territorial wars with other organizations. I run a business, not a street gang. That doesn't make it right. No, he agreed quietly, it doesn't. But it makes it controllable. And control is the only thing that stands between order and chaos in this business. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of Harrison's revelations settling between them like a physical presence. Camila found herself struggling with emotions she had no training for. Understanding without approval, sympathy without agreement, attraction to a man whose motivations she could comprehend even if she couldn't condone his methods. There's more, Harrison said finally. Something you need to understand about why your investigation has been so successful. The change in his tone made her look up sharply. What do you mean? Harrison reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. Your case against me. It's very impressive. Detailed financial records, shipping manifests, communication intercepts. Almost like someone with inside knowledge was feeding you information. Camila's blood went cold. Are you saying? I'm saying someone in my organization has been working with the DEA for months. Someone with access to everything you'd need to build a case. Harrison slid the folder across to her. Someone who's been setting me up for a fall. With trembling fingers, Camila opened the folder. Inside were bank records, shipping documents, and communication logs, all the evidence that formed the backbone of her investigation. But written in the margins were notes in handwriting she didn't recognize, pointing out the most incriminating details. Who? She whispered. My business partner and best friend for the past 5 years, Harrison said, his voice heavy with betrayal. The man who's been like a brother to me since college. Marcus Chun. The name hit her like a thunderbolt. Marcus Chun was Harrison's legitimate business partner in Kane Technologies, but according to DEA intelligence, he was also completely uninvolved in the criminal side of the operation. Their entire case was built on the assumption that Chun was an innocent businessman being used by his criminal partner. That's impossible, Camila said automatically. Our intelligence shows Chun is clean. He's never been involved in any of the drug operations. Your intelligence is wrong, Harrison replied grimly. Marcus has been orchestrating both sides of this game from the beginning. He's the one who introduced me to the suppliers after Vasquez went down. He's the one who suggested expanding into new territories. And he's the one who's been feeding information to the DEA to ensure that when this all comes crashing down, I'm the only one who goes to prison. The implications were staggering. If Harrison was telling the truth, then everything Camila thought she knew about the case was wrong. Marcus Chun wasn't an innocent victim. He was the puppet master pulling all the strings. Why would he do this? She asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. Money and immunity, Harrison said simply. The DEA doesn't know he's the real architect of the operation. When I go down, he inherits a $200 million criminal empire and the legitimate business, plus immunity for his cooperation in bringing down the real criminal. Camila's mind raced through the evidence she'd collected, re-examining it through this new lens. The pattern became clear with horrifying clarity. Every piece of incriminating evidence led directly to Harrison, while carefully avoiding any connection to Chun. It was masterful manipulation, and she'd fallen for it completely. You have proof of this? She asked. Harrison nodded toward the monitors. 6 months of security footage, financial records showing payments to Chun from cartel representatives, and recorded conversations where he discusses the timeline for my elimination. Everything you need to understand that you've been hunting the wrong man. But you're still guilty, Camila pointed out, her sense of justice warring with this new information. You've still been running a drug trafficking operation. Yes, Harrison admitted without hesitation. I am absolutely guilty of drug trafficking, money laundering, and a dozen other federal crimes. But I'm not the mastermind you think I am. I'm the fall guy who got too comfortable in his role." The revelation changed everything and nothing. Harrison was still a criminal who deserved to face justice for his crimes. But he was also a victim of manipulation by someone far more calculating and ruthless than he'd ever been. "Show me the evidence," Camila said quietly. For the next 2 hours, Harrison walked her through files, recordings, and financial documents that painted a picture of betrayal so complete it took her breath away. Marcus Chun had indeed been orchestrating both sides of the investigation, feeding the DEA just enough real intelligence to build a case while carefully protecting himself from any culpability. As the truth sank in, Camila realized she was facing an impossible choice. She could arrest Harrison based on the evidence she'd already collected, but that would allow the real architect of the operation to escape justice. Or she could trust the word of an admitted criminal and risk her career on the possibility that together they could bring down the man who'd been playing them both. But there was something else growing between them as they worked through the evidence together, a partnership born of mutual betrayal and shared purpose that felt more dangerous than anything she'd ever experienced in her career. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. Harrison met her eyes across the desk, and for a moment she saw past the criminal, past the calculating businessman, to the 19-year-old boy who'd lost his father to corruption and spent 15 years seeking justice in all the wrong ways. "I want your help bringing down the man who destroyed both our cases," he said simply. "And maybe we can figure out if there's a way for both of us to come out of this with something that matters more than winning." As Denver's lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk beyond the windows, Camila Torres realized she was about to make a decision that would either destroy her career or give her the biggest victory in DA history. But more than that, she was about to choose whether to trust a man who'd built his life on deception, a man who was offering her something she'd never expected to find in the middle of the most important case of her career: the truth. And possibly, if she was brave enough to reach for it, redemption for them both. The cabin sat nestled against the foothills of the Rockies, like a secret whispered between the pines. Harrison had acquired the property 3 years earlier, not for romantic getaways, but as a secure location for high-level criminal meetings that required absolute privacy. Now, as dawn broke over the snow-covered peaks, it served as sanctuary for two people whose worlds had collided in ways neither could have predicted. Camila stood at the kitchen window, cradling a steaming mug of coffee between her palms, watching Harrison split firewood in the crisp morning air. He'd traded his expensive suits for worn jeans and a thick flannel shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. Each swing of the axe was precise, controlled. Even in this simple task, he moved with the fluid efficiency of a man accustomed to making every action count. 24 hours ago, I was hunting him. Now I'm hiding with him. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, watching him work in the golden morning light, she felt something dangerously close to peace. After spending the night reviewing evidence, making encrypted calls to trusted contacts, and planning their next moves, they'd fallen into an unexpected rhythm of partnership that felt more natural than anything in her carefully ordered life. "Coffee's getting cold," she called through the open window. Harrison looked up, his breath forming silver clouds in the frigid air, and smiled, not the calculated expression she'd seen him use in business meetings, but something genuine and unguarded that made her pulse quicken. "Almost done. Can't have a safe house without a proper fire." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. A DEA agent and a drug trafficker, playing house in a criminal safe house while planning to bring down the man who betrayed them both. If her training instructors at Quantico could see her now, they'd probably have her committed for psychological evaluation. But as Harrison climbed the porch steps, stomping snow from his boots, Camila realized that this felt more real than anything she'd experienced in her 5 years with the Bureau. The careful distance she maintained from everyone in her life, colleagues, friends, the occasional boyfriend who couldn't understand why her job always came first, had melted away completely in the presence of a man who understood the weight of living with secrets. "Your turn to take a break," Harrison said, setting down the armload of firewood and moving to the stove where eggs were sizzling in a cast-iron skillet. "When's the last time you had a real meal?" "Define real," Camilla replied, settling onto one of the rustic bar stools that surrounded the kitchen island. "I'm usually living on coffee, and whatever takeout doesn't require sitting down." "That explains why you're too thin," Harrison said, plating eggs alongside thick slices of bacon and toast made from bread that probably cost more per loaf than most people spend on groceries in a week. "I am not too thin," Camilla protested, though she was secretly pleased that he'd been paying attention to details like that. "You're beautiful," Harrison said simply, setting the plate in front of her. "But you're also running on adrenaline and caffeine instead of actual nutrition. When this is over, I'm taking you to the best restaurant in Denver." The casual assumption that there would be an after for them hung in the air like a promise neither was quite ready to examine too closely. Instead, Camilla focused on the food, which was admittedly the best breakfast she'd had in months. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked around a bite of perfectly prepared eggs. "My mother," Harrison replied, settling beside her with his own plate. "After my father died, it was just the two of us. She worked double shifts at the hospital to keep us afloat, so I learned to handle the domestic stuff." It was another piece of the puzzle that was Harrison Kane, the grieving boy who'd learned to care for his family, hidden beneath layers of criminal calculation and business acumen. Each revelation made him more human, more complicated, and infinitely more dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. "Is she still alive?" Camilla asked gently. Harrison's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "She died 2 years ago. Cancer. By then, I had enough money to get her the best treatment available, but—" He shrugged, a gesture that couldn't quite hide the pain. "Sometimes money isn't enough." "I'm sorry," Camilla said, meaning it. "That must have been devastating." "The hardest part was that she never knew," Harrison said quietly. "About the business, I mean. She thought I was just very successful in tech. When she got sick, I wanted to tell her everything, about why I'd really built the empire, about bringing down the man who killed Dad. But she was so proud of what she thought I'd accomplished legitimately." "So you let her die believing her son was a successful businessman, not a criminal seeking justice for his father," Camilla finished softly. It seemed kinder than the truth. They ate in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in thoughts about the prices they'd paid for the choices they'd made. Outside, snow began falling again, large flakes that caught the morning light like scattered diamonds. "What about your family?" Harrison asked eventually. "Do they know what you do for a living?" Camilla's laugh held no humor. "My parents think I work in accounting for the federal government. They worry enough about me being unmarried at 29 without adding potentially getting shot by drug dealers to their list of concerns." "Are you?" "Unmarried by choice, or just haven't found the right person?" The question was casual, but Camilla caught the undercurrent of genuine interest. "Choice, mostly. Hard to build a relationship when you can't talk about your job, you travel constantly, and your idea of a romantic evening is surveillance footage and case files." "Sounds lonely." "It is," she admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "But it's also important work. Every dealer we take down, every supply line we cut, every kid who doesn't get hooked because we disrupted distribution, it matters." Harrison set down his fork and studied her face with an intensity that made her skin warm. "You really believe in justice, don't you? Not just the law, but actual justice. Don't you?" "I used to," Harrison said slowly. "When I started this whole thing, I told myself I was evening the scales, taking down the corrupt system that killed my father. But somewhere along the way, it became about power and money instead of justice. And now—" Harrison reached across the small space between their stools, his fingers brushing against hers where they rested on the granite countertop. The contact was electric, sending heat racing up her arm and straight to her chest. Now I'm sitting in a safe house with a DEA agent who's risking everything to help me bring down the man who's been playing us both, he said, his voice rough with emotion. And I'm wondering if maybe it's not too late to remember what justice actually looks like. Camila turned her hand palm up, letting their fingers intertwine. It's not too late, Harrison. But it's going to cost you everything you've built. Everything I built was already gone the moment Marcus decided to sacrifice me, Harrison replied. The only question now is whether I can help you build something better from the ashes. They moved to the living room after breakfast, spreading files and laptops across the coffee table in front of a fire that painted everything in warm golden light. But their investigation kept being interrupted by moments of connection that had nothing to do with criminal evidence. When Camila shivered despite the warmth, Harrison disappeared upstairs and returned with a thick cashmere sweater that smelled like his cologne. When Harrison's laptop battery died and he cursed in frustration, Camila wordlessly handed him her charger, their fingers brushing in a way that made both of them forget about electronics entirely. Tell me something that's not in any file, Camila said during one of their breaks, curled against the couch cushions with her feet tucked under her. Like what? I don't know. Something real. Something that makes you Harrison instead of Kane. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. I collect vintage motorcycles, he said finally. Completely impractical for a man who supposedly made his money in software, but I love working on engines. There's something honest about mechanical problems. They have solutions that don't require lying or manipulation. How many do you have? 7. There's a 1947 Indian chief that I've been restoring for 3 years. Still can't get the carburetor adjusted properly. He smiled, and for a moment looked like nothing more dangerous than a man who enjoyed tinkering with old machines. Your turn. Something not in your personnel file. I wanted to be a teacher, Camila said without hesitation. Elementary school. I love kids, and I thought it would be amazing to help shape young minds, watch them discover the world. Why didn't you? Same reason you ended up running drugs instead of just building software. Life happened. My older brother got mixed up with the wrong crowd in high school, started using, ended up overdosing when I was a sophomore in college. The words came easier than she'd expected, maybe because Harrison understood the weight of personal tragedy. I changed my major to criminal justice the next semester. I'm sorry, Harrison said, and she could tell he meant it. That must have been hell for your family. It was. But it gave me purpose, you know? Every dealer I arrest, every supply line I cut, it's one less family that has to go through what we did. They looked at each other across the coffee table, two people who'd been shaped by loss into the roles that had brought them together in the most unlikely circumstances. We're a mess, aren't we? Harrison said softly. Completely, Camila agreed. A DEA agent and a drug trafficker, falling for each other while planning to destroy a criminal empire. Falling for each other? Harrison repeated, his voice carefully neutral. Camila felt heat rise in her cheeks. I didn't mean. I did, Harrison interrupted, standing and moving around the table to sit beside her on the couch. Fall for you, I mean. Somewhere between that first night at the hotel and watching you risk your career to help me find the truth, I fell completely for you. His proximity was intoxicating, the warmth radiating from his body, the scent of his skin, the way his eyes seemed to see straight through every defense she'd ever built. Harrison. I know it's impossible, he said, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. I know I'm the last man you should want, and you're the last woman I should need. But I've never felt anything like this before. Neither have I, she whispered, leaning into his touch despite every logical reason she shouldn't. When he kissed her, it was nothing like the desperate passion they'd shared at the hotel. This was slow, tender, full of the understanding that had grown between them over the past day of revelations and shared purpose. His lips were warm and soft, moving against hers with a reverence that made her heart ache. "We shouldn't," she breathed against his mouth, even as her arms wound around his neck. "No," he agreed, trailing kisses along her jaw. "We absolutely shouldn't." But they were already lost, and they both knew it. Whatever consequences awaited them in the real world, career destruction, criminal prosecution, the impossible logistics of loving someone on the opposite side of the law, in this moment, wrapped in firelight and the warmth of unexpected connection, nothing mattered except the way they fit together like missing pieces of the same puzzle. When they finally broke apart, breathless and shaken, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "What happens now?" Camila asked. "Now we finish what we started," Harrison said firmly. "We bring down Marcus, we save what's left of our integrity, and then we figure out if love is strong enough to build something real from the wreckage of everything we used to be." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white as if offering them a clean slate. But inside the warm cabin, a DEA agent and a criminal held each other close and dared to believe that redemption might be possible for even the most broken souls, if they were brave enough to fight for it together. What happens when love blooms in the most impossible circumstances? Let me know in the comments if you think Camila and Harrison can really make this work. The afternoon passed in a blur of strategy sessions and stolen moments. Every time they bent over the same document, their shoulders would brush. Every time one of them stood to pace while thinking, the other's eyes would follow. The tension between them was electric, but underneath it was something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose that neither had experienced before. As evening approached, they realized they'd made more progress in one day than Camila had in months of traditional investigation. Having someone with intimate knowledge of the criminal operation was invaluable, but more than that, Harrison's analytical mind and her investigative training complemented each other perfectly. "We make a good team," Harrison observed as they reviewed their plan for approaching Marcus. "We do," Camila agreed, then looked up from her notes to meet his eyes. "In more ways than one." The fire crackled in the hearth, painting them both in warm light as the reality of their situation settled around them like a comfortable blanket. Tomorrow would bring danger, difficult choices, and the possibility that everything they were building together would crumble under the weight of the real world. But tonight, they had each other, the truth, and the kind of love that songs were written about, the kind that transforms people into better versions of themselves, the kind that makes impossible dreams feel within reach. For the first time in years, both Harrison Kane and Camila Torres fell asleep believing that redemption might not just be possible, but inevitable. The antiseptic smell of the hospital corridor was a sharp contrast to the pine-scented air of the cabin where everything had felt possible just 24 hours earlier. Camila sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair outside the surgical wing, her clothes still stained with Harrison's blood, her hands trembling despite the coffee agent Rodriguez had brought her an hour ago. "He took a bullet meant for me." The thought played on repeat in her mind, a mantra of guilt and something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Through the chaos of Marcus's arrest and the medical emergency that followed, one truth had emerged with crystalline clarity. Harrison Kane, the criminal she'd been investigating for months, had risked his life to save hers without hesitation. Torres. Agent Rodriguez approached carefully, his own arm in a sling from the shootout with Marcus's men. The attack on their surveillance van had been brutal but not fatal. Marcus's intelligence had been incomplete, thank God. The doctors say Kane's stable. Bullet missed the major arteries. Camila nodded without looking up from her hands. "Any word on the recording?" "That's the interesting part," Rodriguez said, settling into the chair beside her. The jammer Marcus used only worked for about 3 minutes. We got everything else, his confession about Kane's father, the details about the drug operation, even his threats against you. He paused. Kane's testimony, combined with that recording, will put Marcus away for life. And Harrison? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. That's complicated. Camila finally looked up, meeting his concerned gaze. How complicated? He's still a criminal, Torres. Wire or no wire, good intentions or not, Harrison Kane ran a multimillion-dollar drug trafficking operation for 3 years. People died because of the drugs he moved. Families were destroyed. The words hit like physical blows, each one a reminder of the impossible situation they were in. Camila had seen the evidence files. Dozens of overdose deaths linked to the high-grade cocaine Harrison's network had distributed. Photos of crime scenes, grieving families, destroyed communities. How could she reconcile those images with the man who'd held her so tenderly in the cabin, who'd spoken with such pain about wanting to be worthy of her love? But he was manipulated, she said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Marcus used his father's death to turn him into exactly what Marcus needed, Rodriguez finished gently. I'm not saying Kane's evil, Torres. I'm saying the justice system doesn't typically recognize my boss lied to me as a defense for drug trafficking. Dr. Patricia Henley emerged from the surgical wing, still wearing scrubs spotted with blood. Agent Torres? Mr. Kane is awake and asking for you. The surgery went well. We were able to repair the damage to his shoulder. He'll make a full recovery. Camila stood on unsteady legs, her heart hammering against her ribs. Can I see him? For a few minutes. He needs rest, but he's been quite insistent about speaking with you. The walk down the hospital corridor felt like walking toward a cliff's edge. With each step, Camila's mind raced through the impossible choices ahead. Harrison would face federal charges regardless of his cooperation with the DEA. The best-case scenario was a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony against other members of Marcus's organization. The worst case was life in prison for conspiracy and drug trafficking. And somewhere in between those extremes was the question that terrified her most. What happened to them? Harrison's room was private, secured by 2 federal marshals who nodded respectfully as she approached. Through the small window in the door, she could see him propped up in the hospital bed, his left shoulder heavily bandaged, his face pale but alert. When their eyes met through the glass, something electric passed between them, the same connection that had sparked in the Denver airport, now complicated by everything they discovered about each other. 5 minutes, one of the marshals said, opening the door. Harrison looked smaller in the hospital bed, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. The man who'd commanded criminal empires and boardrooms alike was reduced to standard-issue hospital pajamas and 4 tubes. But his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had haunted her surveillance photos, were as intense as ever. You're alive, he said simply, his voice rough with emotion and medication. Thanks to you. Camila approached the bed slowly, as if he were a wild animal that might bolt. The doctors say you'll be fine. Will I? The question carried layers of meaning beyond the physical injury. Rodriguez filled me in on the recording situation. Sounds like Marcus's confession sealed his fate. And yours, Camila said quietly, taking the chair beside his bed. Harrison, you're still going to face charges. What you did for the investigation, taking that bullet, it matters, but it doesn't erase 3 years of drug trafficking. He nodded, the acceptance in his expression breaking her heart. I know. I've known since the moment I decided to wear that wire. His uninjured hand found hers, fingers intertwining with a familiarity that defied their complicated circumstances. The question is whether you can live with loving a man who's going to prison. The directness of the question stole her breath. No dancing around the issue, no false promises or desperate plans. Just the brutal truth of their situation laid bare between them. "I don't know," she whispered, and immediately hated herself for the honesty. "Harrison, the things you've done. I've seen the case files. The overdose victims, the families destroyed by the drugs your network moved. How do I reconcile that with this man I've fallen in love with?" "You don't," he said simply. "Because they're the same person. I'm not some misunderstood victim who got manipulated into crime, Camila. I made choices. Terrible choices. The fact that Marcus lied to me about my father doesn't change the fact that I chose to traffic drugs, chose to launder money, chose to build a criminal empire." His brutal self-assessment was somehow more devastating than any accusation she could have made. Here was a man taking full responsibility for his actions, not hiding behind excuses or justifications. "But here's what I know," Harrison continued, his grip on her hand tightening. "Meeting you changed something fundamental in me. Not just the investigation. That was about justice, about stopping Marcus. This is about becoming someone worthy of the love you've shown me. Someone who can look at himself in the mirror without flinching." Camila felt tears threatening and fought them back. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that loving you has made me want to be the man you believed I could be. Even if I never get the chance to be that man outside prison walls." He paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel transparent. "I'm saying that whatever time I have left, whether it's 5 years or 50, I want to spend it earning the redemption you've inspired in me." The monitor beside his bed beeped steadily, marking time in their impossible moment. Outside the window, Denver stretched toward the mountains, a city full of honest people living honest lives. Inside this sterile room, a criminal and a federal agent grappled with a love that should never have existed but felt more real than anything either had ever experienced. "The DEA is offering you a deal," Camila said finally. "Testimony against Marcus's entire network in exchange for 15 years instead of life. You'd be eligible for parole in 10 with good behavior." 10 years, Harrison repeated, as if testing how the words felt. "You'd be 39 when I got out. If I got out." "If you got out," she confirmed. "That's a long time to wait for someone." "It is." They sat in silence, the weight of impossible mathematics pressing down on them. 10 years of prison. 10 years of Camila building a life without him. 10 years of letters and supervised visits, and wondering if love could survive such an extended test. "I need to tell you something," Harrison said suddenly. "About the night we met at the airport." Camila's stomach clenched. "What about it?" "I knew who you were." The words hit like a physical blow. "What?" "Not that you were DEA," Harrison clarified quickly. "But I knew you'd been asking questions about me in certain circles. My security people had flagged you as someone showing unusual interest in my business activities." He met her shocked gaze steadily. "When I saw you in that airport line, I knew exactly who you were." "And you still—" Camila's mind reeled with the implications. "You still shared that room with me? Still opened up to me? Because the moment I saw you, really saw you, not just as a potential threat, something shifted. You weren't what I expected. You were." He searched for words. "Real. Genuine. The first person in years who looked at me like I was a human being instead of an asset or a target." "So you manipulated me?" The accusation came out harsher than she'd intended, but the sense of betrayal was overwhelming. "At first, maybe," Harrison admitted. "I thought I could charm you, find out what you knew, neutralize the threat. But then you started talking about justice, about making the world better, and I realized I was falling in love with everything I'd given up when I chose the criminal life. The honesty was brutal and beautiful and completely devastating. Here was the final piece of their complicated puzzle. Harrison had known she was investigating him from the very beginning, but somewhere in their impossible courtship, manipulation had transformed into genuine love. "God, Harrison," Camila whispered. "How many more secrets are there?" "None," he said firmly. "That was the last one. Everything else, every moment in that cabin, every word I've spoken about loving you, has been completely real." A knock on the door interrupted them. Agent Rodriguez peered in, his expression apologetic but firm. "Torres, we need to go. Kane's lawyer is here, and the prosecutors want to discuss the plea arrangement." The real world was intruding on their bubble of impossible love. Soon Harrison would be transferred to federal holding, then to trial, then to whatever prison would house him for the next decade. Soon Camila would return to her regular assignments, chasing new criminals and building new cases. "I need an answer," Harrison said urgently as Rodriguez waited in the doorway. "Not about waiting for me. I'd never ask you to put your life on hold for 10 years. But I need to know, can you forgive me? Can you find a way to remember this love without hating me for the man I was before I met you?" Camila looked into his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had captivated her from across an airport terminal, that had held such tenderness in the firelight of the cabin, that now held nothing but desperate love and complete acceptance of whatever judgment she rendered. The choice was impossible. Love the criminal who'd helped flood the streets with poison, or walk away from the man who'd risked everything to save her life and bring his mentor to justice. Embrace the connection that had transformed them both, or maintain the moral clarity that had guided her entire career. "Torres," Rodriguez said gently, "we really need to go." Camila stood slowly, her decision crystallizing with painful clarity. She leaned down and kissed Harrison's forehead, letting her lips linger against his skin as she whispered her answer. "I choose you," she said so quietly only he could hear. "I choose us. Whatever that means, however long it takes, I choose this love that shouldn't exist but does." Harrison closed his eyes, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw tears slip down his cheeks. 10 years is a long time. "Then you'd better make sure you come back to me," she replied, her own tears finally falling freely. "Because I'll be waiting. Not putting my life on hold, not sitting around like some tragic figure. I'll be building a life worth coming back to, and when you're ready for redemption, I'll be ready to help you find it." As Rodriguez gently guided her from the room, Camila looked back one last time to see Harrison watching her with an expression of wonder and gratitude and love so profound it took her breath away. Whatever came next, the trials, the separation, the long years of rebuilding, they would face it together, even when they were apart. Sometimes love wasn't about finding someone perfect. Sometimes it was about finding someone brave enough to change, and being brave enough to believe that change was possible. The choice was made. Now came the real test, proving that love could survive justice, that redemption was possible, and that some connections were strong enough to endure even the consequences of our worst decisions. The morning sun painted the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and rose as Camila Torres stepped out of her silver Honda Civic in the parking lot of the Federal Correctional Institution Englewood. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked her appearance in the side mirror. Navy blue dress, understated makeup, hair pulled back in a style that had become her signature over the past 6 years. At 35, she carried herself with the confidence of a woman who'd built something meaningful from the ashes of impossible circumstances. This is it. The day we've both been working toward. The past 6 years had been a masterclass in patience, faith, and the kind of love that grew stronger through separation rather than weaker. Harrison had served his time with a kind of dedication he'd once applied to building criminal empires, earning his bachelor's degree in social work, completing every rehabilitation program available, and becoming a mentor to younger inmates struggling with addiction and criminal thinking patterns. Camila had built her own empire during those years, leaving the DEA to start a non-profit organization called Second Chances, which provided support and resources for families affected by drug trafficking. She testified before Congress about criminal justice reform, written a book about the intersection of love and justice, and become one of the most respected advocates for redemptive rehabilitation in the country. But none of those accomplishments mattered as much as this moment. Camila Torres for Harrison Kane, she told the corrections officer at the release desk, her voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions in her chest. "He'll be out in just a few minutes," the officer replied kindly. Officer Janet Murphy had processed dozens of these releases over the years, but something about this one felt special. She'd watched the correspondence between these two, the letters that arrived like clockwork every week, the way Kane's face lit up during their monthly visits, the obvious love that had somehow survived and thrived despite impossible circumstances. Through the reinforced glass windows, Camila could see other families waiting, wives, children, parents, all gathered to welcome home men who'd paid their debt to society. The nervous energy in the room was palpable, hope and fear mingling in equal measure as people prepared to rebuild relationships that had been sustained by letters and brief visits for years. The heavy steel door opened with a mechanical clank, and Camila's breath caught in her throat. Harrison Kane walked through that door as a man transformed. At 40, he traded the expensive suits and criminal confidence for something far more valuable: genuine peace. His hair was shorter now, showing distinguished threads of silver at the temples. His body had been honed by years of prison workouts, but more importantly, his eyes held a clarity and purpose that had been missing during his criminal years. He wore simple jeans and a blue button-down shirt, clothes Camila had brought for this moment, and when he saw her, his face broke into a smile that could have powered the entire city of Denver. "Camila," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. She ran to him then, all pretense of composure abandoned, throwing herself into arms that closed around her like she was the most precious thing in the universe. They held each other in the middle of that institutional waiting room, two people who'd chosen love over logic and somehow made it work through 6 years of separation and growth. "You're really here," she whispered against his chest, breathing in the unfamiliar scent of prison soap and industrial laundry detergent that would soon be replaced by the cologne she'd missed for so many years. "I'm here," he confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm not the same man who went in." She pulled back to study his face, seeing the truth of his words in every line and angle. This wasn't the calculated criminal she'd fallen in love with, nor was it the broken man who'd been wheeled into surgery 6 years earlier. This was someone entirely new, someone who'd been forged in the fire of consequence and emerged refined, purposeful, genuinely redeemed. "I know," she said simply. "I can see it." They walked out of the prison together, Harrison pausing at the gate to look back at the facility that had been his home for 6 years. "Strange," he murmured. "I thought I'd hate this place forever. But it gave me something I never had before." "What's that?" "The chance to become someone worthy of your love." The drive back to Denver was surreal, Harrison marveling at the changes in the city, the new buildings and technologies that had emerged during his incarceration. But mostly they drove in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, both processing the magnitude of this moment they'd worked toward for so long. Camila had prepared for this day with the same meticulous attention to detail she'd once applied to federal investigations. Harrison's apartment was waiting, a modest one-bedroom in Capitol Hill that she'd furnished with care, stocking it with his favorite foods and books by authors he'd discovered during his imprisonment. She'd arranged for him to start work the following Monday at Second Chances, where his unique perspective on criminal rehabilitation would help other former offenders navigate their own redemption journeys. But first, there was something else that needed to happen. "There's someone I want you to meet," Camila said as they pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Cemetery. Harrison's expression grew solemn as understanding dawned. Your father. Miguel Torres had passed away 3 years earlier, and Camila had grieved not just his loss, but the fact that Harrison hadn't been able to meet the man whose daughter he loved. Her father had been a Denver police officer for 30 years, a man who dedicated his life to justice and protecting the innocent. His opinion would have mattered more than anyone's. They walked through the cemetery in the late afternoon light, their shadows long on the grass as Camila led Harrison to a simple granite headstone marked Miguel A. Torres, beloved father, devoted officer, seeker of justice. Daddy, Camila said softly, kneeling to place fresh flowers at the base of the stone. I want you to meet Harrison. I know what you'd say about the choices he made, and you'd be right to say them. But I also know you'd see what I see, a man who's truly changed, who's dedicated his life to making amends for the harm he caused. Harrison knelt beside her, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Torres, I can't undo the damage my crimes caused to families like yours, families who've spent their lives fighting the kind of violence I once facilitated. But I can promise you that every day for the rest of my life will be spent trying to tip the scales toward justice. Your daughter taught me what redemption looks like, and I won't waste the second chance she's given me. They stayed at the graveside for nearly an hour, Harrison sharing his plans for the future, his commitment to the non-profit work, his understanding that earning forgiveness was a lifetime project, not a single moment of transformation. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, Camila felt a peace settle over her that she hadn't experienced since that terrible morning in the federal building 6 years earlier. He would have liked you, she said as they walked back to the car. Eventually. It would have taken time, but he would have seen what I see. And what's that? A man brave enough to change everything about himself for love. That evening, they sat on the small balcony of Harrison's new apartment, sharing Chinese takeout and watching the lights of Denver twinkle to life below them. The city looked different from this perspective, not the empire to be conquered that Harrison had once seen, but a community to be served. I have something for you, Camila said, reaching into her purse to pull out a small velvet box. Harrison's eyes widened. Camila. 6 years ago, you asked me to wait for you, she said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band. I did more than wait, I grew. I built a life worth sharing. I became someone who could stand beside you as an equal partner in whatever comes next. Are you? I'm proposing, Harrison Kane, she said with a smile that held 6 years of love, patience, and unwavering faith in the power of redemption. I'm asking if you'll marry a former DEA agent who believes that people can change, that love can conquer even the darkest past, and that our best days are still ahead of us. Harrison took the ring with hands that shook slightly, then slipped it onto his finger as tears traced down his cheeks. I was planning to ask you next month, he admitted. I wanted to prove I could make it on the outside first, show you I was worthy of the life you've built. You've been proving that for 6 years, Camila replied. And I've been planning this proposal since your 3rd year inside, when I realized that what we have isn't just love, it's partnership. Partnership in building something beautiful from the wreckage of our mistakes. They kissed then, on that small balcony overlooking the city where they'd first met, where their impossible love story had begun in a snowstorm and survived everything life could throw at them. It was a kiss that tasted like forgiveness and possibility, like second chances and hard-won wisdom. What do you think about love stories that require real sacrifice and change? Drop a comment about whether you believe people can truly transform themselves, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories that will restore your faith in the power of love. So what happens now? Harrison asked as they held each other in the gathering darkness. Now we get married, Camila said simply. Now we run second chances together, your experience with criminal thinking and mine with law enforcement. Now we help other people find their own paths to redemption. Now we prove that some love stories are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth changing everything for. And the past. The past made us who we are. Your crimes, my investigation, the pain we both caused and experienced, all of it led us here. We don't forget it, we don't excuse it, but we don't let it define us either. We let it fuel our commitment to making sure our future is better than anything we could have imagined in our broken yesterdays. As if summoned by their words, snowflakes began to fall, the first snow of the spring season, unusual and beautiful and somehow perfect. They watched it dust the balcony railing, remembering another snowstorm in another time when a DEA agent and a criminal had first looked into each other's eyes and seen possibilities neither had dared to hope for. "I love you, Camila Torres," Harrison said, his voice carrying 6 years of growth, change, and unwavering devotion. "I love you too, Harrison Kane," she replied, "my partner in crime." They sat together in the falling snow, no longer the people they'd been that night in the Denver airport, no longer the calculating criminal and the relentless agent. They were something new, something forged in the crucible of consequence and shaped by the patient work of becoming worthy of each other's love. In 6 months, they would be married in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens, surrounded by the families they'd helped through second chances and the friends who'd supported them through the hardest years of their lives. In 2 years, they would adopt their first child, a teenager whose parents had died from overdoses, giving them the chance to break cycles of trauma and build something beautiful from loss. In 5 years, their nonprofit would be recognized nationally for its innovative approach to criminal rehabilitation. But all of that was in the future. Tonight, they simply held each other and watched the snow fall. Two people who'd learned that the most powerful force in the universe isn't revenge or justice or even law. It's love brave enough to believe in second chances, patient enough to wait for transformation, and strong enough to build something beautiful from the ashes of our worst mistakes. Sometimes the best love stories aren't about finding someone perfect. Sometimes they're about finding someone willing to become perfect for you, and being willing to become perfect for them in return.